She stepped out of the black SUV like she owned the entire valley. Her heels pressed into my dirt road, while two men in bright construction jackets walked behind her carrying clipboards. A huge crane was already standing in the middle of my field, its metal arm stretching toward the sky like a giant finger. I was still 20 yards away when I heard her shout, "Stop right there!" I kept walking anyway. The wind moved slowly across the open grass, and the tall metal tower in the middle of my property hummed quietly like it had already been there for years. But it hadn't. It showed up 3 days ago. 3 days. That was how long it took for strangers to walk onto my land, pour concrete, and build a 70-foot cell tower like they owned the place. The woman looked at me with a tight smile. "You can't cross this line," she said, pointing at a thin orange tape stretched between two sticks. I looked down at it. Then I stepped over it. One of the construction guys gasped quietly. The woman's smile disappeared. "Sir," she said slowly, "this is a restricted construction zone." I looked around at the tractors, the crane, and the tower sitting in the middle of my wheat field. "My field," I said calmly. Her lips pressed together. "I'm Karen Whitmore, president of the Meadow Creek Homeowners Association," she said, lifting her clipboard like a badge. "This project was approved by the HOA board." I nodded slowly. "That's nice." Her eyes narrowed. She clearly expected panic, maybe shouting, maybe begging. Instead, I walked closer to the tower, studying the thick concrete base. Fresh, still drying. Someone had worked fast. Too fast. Karen stepped in front of me. "You need to leave the site immediately," she snapped. I tilted my head. "You built this without asking me." She laughed. Actually laughed. "Oh honey," she said, "this land belongs to the Meadow Creek Development District now." That line made the workers glance at each other. Even they knew that sounded wrong. I looked back toward the dirt road where my old pickup truck sat quietly near the gate. Then I looked back at her. "You sure about that?" Karen flipped a page on her clipboard and shoved a paper toward my chest. "According to the HOA expansion agreement filed last year, unused farmland within 1 mile of the subdivision can be repurposed for community infrastructure." She tapped the paper proudly. "So yes, I'm very sure." I didn't take the paper. Instead, I looked at the tower again, tall, ugly, and sitting exactly in the center of my best soil. A soft humming sound came from the equipment box beside it. Already powered. Already running. They weren't planning to ask permission. They planned to act first and let lawyers clean it up later. Karen folded her arms. "You've been very difficult about selling this land," she said, "but the community needs better signal coverage." One of the workers quietly packed his tools into a truck. He clearly didn't want to be part of this conversation. I finally spoke again. "So your plan was to just take it?" Karen shrugged. "Unused land helps no one." I smiled slightly. That smile made her uncomfortable. She shifted her weight. "You should also know," she added quickly, "that interfering with a telecom installation is a federal offense." I raised an eyebrow. "Federal?" "Yes," she said proudly. "We have full legal backing." Behind her, the crane operator slowly shut down the engine. The sudden silence made everything feel heavier. I walked past her toward the base of the tower. Karen's voice jumped higher. "Hey, I told you to stop." I crouched down and brushed some loose dirt away from the concrete, right where I expected it. A metal plate bolted into the foundation. Company name, permit number, installation contractor, and something else. A lease reference. My fingers brushed the edge of it while I pretended to study the bolts. Karen marched closer. "You are trespassing on an HOA project," she said loudly. "If you don't leave right now, I will call the police." That made me chuckle. One of the workers looked at me like he wanted to warn me about something, but Karen was too busy talking. "You farmers always think you own everything," she continued, "but development changes things." I stood up slowly. "You're right," I said. She smirked. "Finally, some common sense." I dusted my hands. Then I said the one sentence that wiped the smile off her face. "You built the tower on my leased property." Her forehead wrinkled. "What?" I pointed at the metal plate. "That company name. They're renting space on this tower." Karen crossed her arms. "Of course they are. It's a telecom tower." I nodded slowly. "And telecom towers pay rent." She rolled her eyes. "Yes. To the HOA." The construction workers stopped moving. One of them quietly muttered, "Oh boy." I leaned a little closer to Karen. "They don't pay the HOA." She stared at me like I'd just told a bad joke. "Then who do they pay?" I looked at the tower again. then back at her. Whoever owns the land under it. Karen laughed again, louder this time. That would be the HOA district. I shook my head. No. The wind moved across the field again, rustling the wheat around the concrete base. Karen's smile slowly faded. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone. 3 taps. Then I held the screen toward her. A land registry map. Clear property lines, bright red marker exactly where the tower stood, right in the center of my parcel. Karen stared at it. That's not correct, she said quickly. It is. She grabbed the phone from my hand. Her eyes moved across the screen. Parcel number, county seal, ownership name, mine. For the first time since she arrived, Karen looked uncertain. This must be outdated, she said. I gently took the phone back. It was updated yesterday. Her jaw tightened. Well, even if that's true, the tower is already built. I nodded again. Yes. She folded her arms like she'd won. So you can deal with the telecom company's lawyers if you want. I smiled again, because that was the moment she finally stepped into the trap. Karen, I said quietly. What? I am the telecom company. The crane operator suddenly burst out laughing. Karen turned toward him sharply. What is wrong with you? But the man just shook his head. You didn't check the contractor file, did you? Karen's eyes snapped back to me. What does that mean? I pointed up at the tower. My company installed it. Her face turned pale. But the permit, filed under my business license. Her voice cracked. That doesn't make sense. I slipped my phone back into my pocket. It will. Karen looked at the tower again, then back at me, then at the workers who were now watching her like a reality show. You're lying, she said weakly. I shook my head. No. Then I said the line that made one of the workers quietly whisper, damn, you built the tower on my land, using my company, without realizing it. Karen's face drained of color. That the HOA approved the lease, she stammered. I nodded. Yes. And since the tower is already active, her voice was barely steady now. So what? I looked up at the tower humming in the afternoon wind, then back at her. And I said very calmly, rent is due tomorrow. Karen blinked. Rent? I smiled wider. Yes. She swallowed. How much? I paused just long enough to make every worker lean in. Then I said the number that changed the entire day. 5 times the normal rate. Karen's mouth slowly fell open, and that was before she learned what would happen if the payment didn't arrive by midnight. Karen stared at me like the ground under her heels had just disappeared. 5 times, she repeated. The workers around the tower stopped pretending to be busy. One of them leaned against the truck just to watch what would happen next. I nodded calmly. 5 times. Karen laughed, but it sounded forced this time. You can't just raise rent on infrastructure like that. I shrugged. Sure I can. She shook her head hard. No. That's not how contracts work. I pointed at the tower again. You signed the lease, Karen, not me. Her eyebrows pulled together. What are you talking about? I pulled my phone out again and opened the document. The workers leaned closer. Even the crane operator stepped down from his seat. I turned the screen toward her. Right there at the bottom of the contract was a signature. Karen Whitmore, HOA president. Her eyes widened. That's the telecom agreement. Yes, I said quietly. The telecom agreement you signed. She grabbed the phone and scrolled quickly. You tricked us. No. I said. You skipped the part where it says the landowner controls the lease rate. Her lips moved silently while she read. Then she froze. Right there in the middle of the document. Rate adjustment clause. Landowner may increase lease value if installation occurs without written permission. Karen's face turned red. That clause is for emergencies. I crossed my arms. This is an emergency. The crane operator chuckled again. Karen whipped her head toward him. You're not helping. The man raised both hands. Lady, I just drive the crane. Karen turned back to me, breathing harder now. This is harassment. No. I said calmly, it's business. She shook her head. The HOA will fight this. You can try. Her voice rose. We'll sue you. One of the workers whispered to another guy. This lady really didn't read that contract. Karen heard it. Her glare could have melted steel. You're all going to regret this, she snapped. I leaned slightly closer. Karen, you built a tower on someone else's land without asking. That land belongs to the development. It doesn't. She clenched her fists. We filed expansion papers last year. I nodded. You did. Her face brightened for a second. See? But the county rejected them. Her smile collapsed again. What? 3 months ago. Karen's voice dropped. That's impossible. I pulled another file up on my phone. County notice. Application denied. Reason. Private agricultural property. She stared at the screen, then back at the tower, then back at me. You're lying. The crane operator spoke again. Nope. Karen spun around. What do you mean nope? The man scratched his beard. Permit review happens before we build. She blinked. What? County confirmed the landowner this morning, he said. That's him. Karen looked like someone had just slapped her. That the HOA board approved the project. I shrug. HOA boards approve lots of things they don't own. The wind moved through the field again. For the first time since she arrived, Karen looked nervous. She looked back at the tower, then at the equipment box humming beside it, then at the trucks. Shut it down, she ordered suddenly. The workers didn't move. She pointed angrily. I said shut it down. The crane operator crossed his arms. Can't. Why not? Tower is already connected to the network. Karen's eyes widened. You connected it already? He nodded. Yesterday. Karen turned slowly toward me. You did this on purpose. I didn't answer. Because technically, she wasn't wrong. She took a step closer. You planned this. Planned what? This trap. I smiled slightly. You built it. Her voice dropped to a whisper. How much money are we talking about? I looked up at the tower again. Normally, yes, 20,000 a month. Her face went pale again. And 5 times that. I finished the sentence for her. 100,000. The field went completely silent. Even the wind seemed to stop. Karen shook her head slowly. The HOA doesn't have that kind of money. That's not my problem. She looked around like she was searching for help. But the workers were now fully entertained. Remove the tower, she snapped suddenly. The crane operator laughed again. Lady, that thing is buried in 8 feet of concrete. Her voice cracked. Then dig it out. He shook his head. Not without shutting down half the county signal. Karen looked back at me. You would really do that? I shrug again. Rent is due tomorrow. She took a deep breath. You're bluffing. Am I? Yes. She straightened her shoulders. The HOA will simply refuse. I tilted my head. Then the tower gets turned off. You can't do that. I can. People need signal. Then pay rent. Karen's face twisted with anger. You think you're clever. I didn't respond. She stepped closer until we were only a few feet apart. You're just a farmer. Behind her, the crane operator muttered quietly. Oh, she really doesn't know. Karen ignored him. You don't have the power to shut down a telecom tower. That was when my phone rang. The screen lit up with a company name. The same company printed on the metal plate in the concrete. Karen noticed it. Her confidence faded just a little. I answered calmly. Yad. A voice came through the speaker. Network test complete. Tower is fully active. Good. We're ready to transfer control whenever you say. Karen's head snapped toward the phone. Control? She whispered. I nodded slowly. Then I said something that made Karen's knees almost buckle. Put the tower on manual authorization. The voice on the phone replied instantly. Done. Karen stared at me. What does that mean? I slipped the phone back into my pocket. It means. I looked up at the tower again as the small red light at the top blinked slowly in the sky. That if rent isn't paid tomorrow. Karen swallowed. The entire Meadow Creek neighborhood loses signal. Her lips parted. You wouldn't dare. I looked her straight in the eyes and said quietly, Karen, that's not even the worst part. Her voice came out small. What do you mean? I pointed at the equipment box beside the tower. The contract you signed. She waited. Wasn't just for signal coverage. Her face slowly tightened. Then what was it for? I paused long enough to make every person in the field lean forward. Then I said the words that made Karen's hands start shaking. That tower isn't just a cell tower. Karen blinked. What? I smiled slightly. It's also a surveillance node. The crane operator whispered under his breath. Oh, this is getting good. Karen's eyes locked on the metal box beside the tower like it had suddenly become something dangerous. Surveillance, she said slowly. The word came out like it tasted bad. I nodded once. Yes. The workers around us had stopped moving completely now. Nobody wanted to miss what was happening. Karen forced a laugh again, but this one sounded thinner than the last. You expect me to believe that? I shrugged. You already signed the contract. Her eyes flashed. I signed a telecom agreement. Keep reading it, I said. She looked back at the tower, then at the small black dome cameras mounted under the antenna frame. They were easy to miss unless someone pointed them out. Now she saw them. 3 small lenses, all facing different directions. One aimed straight toward the Meadow Creek entrance row. Her voice dropped. Why would a cell tower need cameras? I leaned slightly against the concrete base. Security monitoring. That's ridiculous. Not really. Karen's jaw tightened. The HOA never approved cameras. You did. I said calmly. No. I didn't. I pulled the contract back up on my phone and zoomed in on a section near the bottom. Then I turned the screen toward her again. Additional network hardware permitted under operational clause. Her eyes moved across the text again. Her breathing slowed. You hid that. No. I said. You skipped it. One of the construction workers quietly whispered. Dan. Karen spun toward him. Don't you have work to do? The man lifted a wrench slowly. Not anymore. Tower's finished. Karen turned back to me. You installed surveillance equipment on HOA property without approval. I smiled faintly. Your first mistake was thinking this was HOA property. Her shoulders stiffened again. Fine, she snapped. Even if it's on your land, you can't spy on the neighborhood. I'm not spying. Those are cameras. They're traffic monitors. Karen laughed bitterly. Oh sure. Used to track signal usage and security access. Her eyes narrowed. You're twisting words. I didn't answer. Instead I tapped my phone again. The cameras above us made a soft mechanical shift. Karen heard it. Her head snapped upward. What was that? I pointed at the tower. Remote calibration. One of the workers whistled quietly. Karen stepped backward. You're recording us right now. Possibly. Her face turned red again. You cannot record people without consent. Public road, I said simply. She turned around quickly, looking toward the entrance road that ran along the edge of the field. Technically, it was visible from here. The camera pointed straight at it. Karen looked back at me. You set this up. I shrugged. You built the tower. For a moment she didn't speak. The field was quiet, except for the faint electrical hum coming from the tower equipment. Karen crossed her arms again, trying to rebuild her confidence. This doesn't change anything. No. No. She pointed at the tower. You still raised the rent illegally. I didn't. Yes, you did. Check clause 12. She rolled her eyes again but opened the document anyway. Her finger slid down the screen, then stopped. She read it twice, then 3 times. Her lips pressed together. Clause 12. Unauthorized construction triggers rate adjustment. Karen lowered the phone slowly. You planned this. I didn't answer. The crane operator spoke quietly from behind her. Lady, you literally signed it. Karen glared at him again. You need to stay out of this. The man shrugged. Hard to stay out when the whole thing is sitting in the middle of the guy's field. Karen's breathing grew heavier. This is harassment, she repeated. You keep using that word. Because it is. No. I said calmly. This is what happens when people skip contracts. Karen stepped closer again. You think you've won. I tilted my head. You think you haven't lost. Her eyes hardened. The HOA has lawyers. Good. We'll take this to court. That's your right. And the tower will stay active while we fight. That made me smile again. You might want to read clause 16. She froze again, then slowly looked back at the screen. Clause 16. Her face drained of color. Temporary shutdown permitted, if rent, unpaid. Karen looked up slowly. You can't shut down emergency signal. It's not an emergency tower. It serves the neighborhood. Yes. Her voice rose again. That's abuse of power. I laughed quietly. You tried to take someone's land. That land is mine. Her mouth snapped shut. One of the workers whispered to another guy. This lady walked straight into it. Karen ignored them again. You're bluffing about the shutdown. I pulled my phone out again. Then I opened a small control panel app. Tower ID. Signal strength. Network routing. Karen leaned slightly closer. What is that? Control interface. Her eyes widened. That's fake. I pressed a button. Above us the tower made a soft clicking sound. Then the red light at the top blinked faster. Karen's head snapped upward. What did you do? Signal test. She looked back at me. You're insane. Maybe you would cut signal to an entire neighborhood just to prove a point. I didn't answer right away. Instead I looked across the field toward the rows of houses sitting behind the trees. Quiet, peaceful. Most of those people had no idea what their HOA president had just done. Then I said quietly, I gave you a fair price. 5 times normal rent is not fair. It is when someone builds on your land without permission. Karen looked like she wanted to scream, but instead she took a deep breath. Then another. Then she said something that made the workers glance at each other. You're forgetting something. Oh? The HOA has authority in this district. Over houses and land development. Not private farmland. She pointed toward the subdivision again. The county will side with us. That would be interesting. Her eyes narrowed. Why? Because the county already knows. Karen froze. What? I checked my watch casually. They should be arriving soon. Her voice dropped. Who? Right on cue. A vehicle appeared at the end of the dirt road. White? County logo on the door. Karen turned slowly toward it. The truck rolled closer and stopped near the gate. 2 men stepped out. One wore a county inspection badge. The other carried a folder. Karen's confidence flickered again. Why are they here? I shrug. Routine inspection. The inspector walked across the field toward us. Karen quickly straightened her posture. Good, she muttered. This will settle things. The inspector reached the tower and looked up. Well, he said slowly, that went up fast. Karen jumped in quickly. Yes. Meadow Creek HOA approved the project for improved network coverage. The inspector nodded slowly. Then he turned toward me. You the landowner? Yes. Karen's head snapped toward me. The inspector opened his folder. Permit says installation, must have written landowner authorization. Karen stepped forward quickly. We have that through HOA district control. The inspector looked at her. Then back at the document. Then back at her again. No you don't. Karen blinked. Yes we do. No. He repeated calmly. Your expansion request was denied. Her mouth opened. Closed. Then opened again. That must be a mistake. The inspector flipped a page. Filed in January. Rejected in February. Karen looked like someone had drained all the air from her lungs. That's not possible. It's very possible. The inspector pointed at the tower. This structure is currently sitting on private agricultural land. Karen pointed at me. He approved the telecom contract. The inspector looked at me. I shrugged slightly. I approved the tower lease. Karen turned toward him quickly. See? The inspector nodded. That's fine. Karen smiled slightly. Then he continued. But HOA construction without landowner coordination. He closed the folder. That's a violation. Karen's smile vanished again. A violation of county development code. Her voice cracked. But the tower is already built. Yes. Karen swallowed. So what happens now? The inspector looked up at the tower again. Then at me. Then back at her. Well, he spoke calmly. The landowner sets the lease terms. Karen turned toward me slowly. Her voice came out almost as a whisper. You told them. I shrug again. I informed the county that someone built a structure on my land. The inspector added quietly. And raised rent. Karen looked back at him. You support that? That's between the two of you. She shook her head slowly. This is insane. No. The inspector said. It's property law. Karen rubbed her forehead. Then suddenly she straightened again. Fine. Everyone looked at her. If rent 'tis the problem. She pointed at me. The HOA will negotiate. The crane operator muttered quietly. Too late for that. Karen ignored him again. She faced me. What do you want? I told you. 100,000 a month. Her jaw tightened. That's ridiculous. You built without asking. Her eyes burned with anger again. You're enjoying this. Not really. Then lower the rent. No. Karen looked like she was about to explode again. But then something changed in her expression. A small smile appeared. Slow. Cold. You forgot something. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? She turned toward the inspector. County code also requires permits for surveillance equipment. The inspector frowned slightly. Karen pointed up at the cameras. That tower has monitoring devices aimed at private homes. The inspector looked up. The workers looked at each other. Karen folded her arms again. Illegal surveillance carries heavy fines. She looked back at me. Sometimes hundreds of thousands. The inspector studied the tower carefully. Then he looked back at me. Those cameras part of the permit. I answered calmly. Traffic monitoring. Karen laughed. Oh please. The inspector looked thoughtful. Still requires classification. Karen's smile widened. And if it wasn't declared. She let the sentence hang in the air. The inspector slowly nodded. Then yes, that could be a problem. Karen looked at me like she'd have finally regained control. 100,000 a month, she said quietly. or we report illegal surveillance." The field fell silent again. Even the workers stopped breathing. Karen leaned slightly closer. "You tried to trap me," she smiled. "Now it's your turn." The inspector looked between us. "Is there documentation for those cameras?" Karen's eyes stayed locked on mine. I reached slowly into my pocket again, pulled out my phone, opened another file, then held the screen toward the inspector. "Federal Infrastructure Classification." The inspector read the title. His eyebrows rose. Karen's smile slowly faded. "What is that?" she asked. The inspector looked back at me, then at her. Then he said something that made Karen's face go completely white. "This tower," he pointed at the document, "is registered under Federal Infrastructure Monitoring." Karen blinked. "What does that mean?" The inspector closed the folder slowly. "It means the cameras are legal." Her voice cracked. "Under what authority?" The inspector looked at me again, then answered calmly, "Department of Homeland Security Partnership." Karen stared at me like she had never seen me before. "You work for Homeland Security?" I shook my head. "No." Her voice dropped. "Then how?" I said quietly. "My company contracts with them." The workers around us suddenly went very quiet. Karen's lips parted. "You're lying." The inspector tapped the document. "He's not." Karen took a slow step backward, then another. Her voice barely came out. "This tower is federal?" The inspector nodded. "Partially." Karen looked up at the metal structure again, then back at me. And for the first time since she arrived, she looked scared. But she still didn't know the worst part. Because the inspector turned one more page in the folder, then said something that made the crane operator whisper, "Oh man." The inspector looked directly at Karen. "Mrs. Whitmore." She swallowed. "Yes. There's also a complaint filed against the HOA." Karen blinked. "What complaint?" The inspector answered calmly. "Unauthorized land seizure." Her knees almost buckled. "And the penalty," he paused, "starts at $2 million. Karen stared at the inspector like she had just heard a language she didn't understand. $2 million, she whispered. The inspector didn't change his expression. "That's the starting penalty for unlawful development on private agricultural land." Karen's lips moved but no sound came out. For the first time since she stepped onto my field, she looked completely lost. She turned slowly toward me. "You did this," she said quietly. I shook my head. "No, Karen." I pointed gently at the tower. "You did." The workers near the truck didn't even try to hide their reactions anymore. One of them let out a slow whistle. Karen rubbed her forehead again like she was trying to wake up from a nightmare. "This is insane," she muttered. The inspector opened his folder again. "Mrs. Whitmore, did the HOA receive written permission from the landowner before construction?" Karen didn't answer. The inspector asked again. "Did you?" Her voice cracked. "No." He nodded and wrote something down. "Then the violation stands." Karen looked back at me quickly. "Wait." Everyone looked at her. "The tower stays, right?" The inspector raised an eyebrow. "That depends." Karen swallowed. "If the landowner keeps the lease active," she turned toward me again, "then it's not illegal construction anymore." The inspector slowly nodded. "That is correct." Karen straightened slightly. For a second, hope returned to her face. She looked at me. "You want rent?" "Yes." "Then this helps you too." "How?" "If the tower stays, you get paid." "That's true." "If the tower is removed, nobody gets anything." She spread her hands like she had finally found the winning argument. "So we make a deal." I watched her quietly. The workers leaned in again. Karen stepped closer. $100,000 a month is impossible." I didn't answer. "Lower it." "No." Her jaw tightened again. "You're pushing too far." I shrugged. "You pushed first." Karen exhaled slowly. "Fine." Everyone looked at her. She stared at the tower again, then at the houses in the distance, then back at me. 50,000. No. 70. No. 80. I shook my head. Karen's frustration exploded again. "You're not negotiating." "Not really." She pointed at the inspector. "You see this?" He didn't react. "This is extortion." "No," he said calmly. "It's a lease agreement." Karen's shoulders slumped slightly. Then suddenly she looked at the crane operator. "You." The man blinked. "Yet, how long would it take to remove the tower?" He laughed once. "Remove it?" "Yes." He pointed at the concrete base, 8 feet deep. So removing it would cost more than building it." Karen turned back to me. "You wouldn't allow that anyway." "No." "Why'd?" Because the tower stays. Her eyes narrowed again. You do want the money. That's not the main reason. She frowned. Then what is? I looked at the tower again, then toward the entrance row, then back at her. Signal coverage. Karen blinked. For the neighborhood. Yes. She stared at me. You're doing all this, and you still want the signal to stay. I nodded. Karen looked confused now. If you hate the HOA so much, why help the neighborhood? I answered simply. I don't have a problem with the neighborhood. The crane operator muttered quietly. Just the Karen. A couple of workers snorted. Karen shot them a glare. Then she looked back at me. So this is personal? No. Yes, it is. You tried to take someone's land. That land was unused. That doesn't make it yours. Karen opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. The inspector closed his folder. Mrs. Whitmore, the county will need an answer soon. She looked at him. What answer? Whether the HOA accepts the lease terms. Karen looked at the tower again, then at the workers, then at the inspector. Finally, she looked back at me. Give me one reason, she said quietly. One reason why I should agree to this. I thought for a moment. Then I pointed up at the tower. Because if you don't. She waited. It shuts off tonight. Karen's eyes widened again. You wouldn't. I pulled my phone out again. Opened the control screen. Signal routing. Network authorization. Shutdown toggle. Karen saw it. You're bluffing. I pressed a button. The red light at the top of the tower blinked rapidly for 3 seconds, then returned to normal. Karen jumped. What was that? System check. Her confidence finally cracked completely. She looked at the inspector. Can he really shut it down? The inspector shrugged. If he controls the lease and equipment access, yes. Karen's voice went small. The entire neighborhood would lose signal? Yes. Phones? Yes. Internet boosters? Yes. Karen looked toward the subdivision again. Hundreds of homes sat quietly behind the trees. Kids lived there. Families. People who had nothing to do with this mess. Her shoulders dropped. You're putting me in a corner. No. I said calmly. You put yourself there. The field stayed silent for a long moment. Finally Karen spoke again. The HOA will pay the rent. The workers exchanged looks. The crane operator whispered. There it is. Karen continued. But we renegotiate next year. Maybe. Her eyes hardened again. And the cameras. What about them? You limit their direction. That's already done. The inspector nodded slightly. Karen exhaled slowly. Fine. Then she held out her hand. Send the invoice. I looked at her hand. Then shook it once. Midnight tomorrow. She pulled her hand back quickly like it burned. The inspector closed his folder. Then the county considers the issue resolved. Karen nodded weakly. The workers began packing up their tools again. The crane operator climbed back into his seat. Engines started. The afternoon wind moved across the wheat field again. Karen walked toward her SUV slowly. Halfway there she stopped. Then turned back toward me. You knew this would happen, she said. I didn't answer. You baited the HOA. You walked onto the hook. Her lips pressed together. You're not just a farmer. No. She studied me carefully. What are you really? I looked up at the tower again, then back at her. Someone who reads contracts. Karen shook her head slowly. Then she climbed into the SUV. The engine started. The vehicle rolled down the dirt road and disappeared. The workers finished packing their trucks. The crane folded down. One by one the vehicles left the field. Soon the only sound left was the quiet hum of the tower. The inspector walked toward his truck but stopped beside me. That was something, he said. I nodded. She nearly got away with it. He looked up at the tower. You really partnered with Homeland Security. Partially. Smart move. I shrug. Signal infrastructure gets attention. The inspector climbed into his truck. Before closing the door he looked at me again. You know the HOA board will hate you. I smiled slightly. They already did. He laughed once, then drove away. Soon I was standing alone in the field again. Just me, and the tall metal tower humming quietly in the wind. My phone buzzed. A message from my network manager. Payment request sent to Meadow Creek HOA. One typed, one reply. Good. Another message arrived. Think they'll pay. I looked toward the distant houses again. Lights were starting to turn on as evening came. Then I typed the answer. They will. Because one thing Karen finally understood. This wasn't about revenge. This was about something Americans care about more than almost anything. Land. And that night, as the red light on top of the tower blinked quietly over my field, the HOA learned a lesson they would never forget. You don't build on someone else's land, unless you're ready to pay the owner for the view.
Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more amazing stories.